So the AMR26 has been a complete disaster this year. It has fallen way below expectations, it's been seconds off the pace, and recently has even fallen behind the new team on the grid who are building their first ever car. And I want to discuss today why I think it is the worst car built at this stage, because of course there are cars that have been slower, the cars that in the mid 2010s that kind of came on the grid for like 1 year and then disappeared. But the point is that this is the worst car built considering the resources and expectations put on the car. So let's have a look at it. Aston Martin have very high quality facilities paid for by Lawrence Stroll, the owner of the team. I know they got high quality wind tunnels, and it's part of what has attracted a lot of the staff they've got, part of the reason Adrian Newey came. So this isn't a team that's trying to build a car with very old facilities. Like even Red Bull has a pretty old wind tunnel and has produced a better car. So this is a team that should have produced at least maybe a midfield car with the resources they've got. But they haven't just built the 10th worst car in Formula 1, they've built the absolute worst car on the grid at this stage because they have not bought any upgrades for it. And this is pretty unacceptable from a team that's been on the grid for a long time now, and a team which has spent a lot of money on getting a lot of technical staff from other teams, with the biggest signing being Adrian Newey. Now looking at the car itself, we saw at Silverstone recently just how bad the chassis of the car is, despite rumours saying that it's just the engine at fault. There's a few onboards from Silverstone showing the amount of understeer in the car and how it would just refuse to turn. Of course, quite a famous clip coming from Stroll at Cops, which you'll probably see on the screen now. So this shows that this is not just Honda's problem, this is a problem with the whole car. This is an aerodynamic issue likely, as well as a mechanical one which needs to be resolved. And not only is the car dead slow, but it's also very dangerous, particularly towards the first part of the season where the vibrations were literally rattling the driver's nerves apart. There's a few onboards from China showing Alonso literally having to let go of the steering wheel and hold his leg because of the intense vibrations going through the car. And it was at the start of the season, sometimes they had to retire just due to health concerns. So this shows that the fundamentals of the project are wrong, because having a slow car is bad enough, but having a dangerous one, which arguably probably shouldn't have even been on the road towards the start of the season, is just unacceptable. It's a very bad look on the Aston Martin brand as a whole, and it is just unimaginable how this disaster was allowed to come, because Adrian Newey last season was saying how he was spending literally nights at the factory trying to get this car ready, and then somehow brought a chassis which was dangerous and slow. And it is clearly a car with fundamental problems, because they've brought no upgrades so far this season, aside from a few minor corrections to try and help with the vibrations, which I think around Japan seemed to work. But it was around that time they fell behind Cadillac and started qualifying right at the back, because it would be different if they turned up to Australia with a car that was dead slow and last, but they had an upgrade very soon that was at least just going to bring it towards Williams where they are. But no, it was clearly a fundamental problem with the car, and also the whole integration with the engine as well, because Honda claimed that they couldn't see the amount of intense vibrations on their test bench, which shows that I think part of the reason was the Aston Martin chassis, maybe due to the aggressive packaging that is often pushed by Adrian Newey. And it's clear that the whole project for the last however many years has just been completely mismanaged, because Adrian Newey came in only last year, so a lot of teams would have already had concepts defined by probably even before the start of 2025, and that obviously can't be helped, and therefore it is a valid excuse, to be fair. But then it makes you wonder if they should have just continued with one concept and then maybe done a wholesale change for 2027, so they at least had a car that was somewhat competitive this year, at least scoring points once in a while. Another big mismanagement of this project is how they did not know how Honda was doing until about November last year. They signed the works deal with Honda in 2023, and for almost 2.5 years did not even seem to be checking how the project over there was going. So they didn't know how far behind they were, and therefore they probably assumed they were about to turn up with a lot more horsepower and overall drivability than they actually did. And that is a big mismanagement, because essentially Aston Martin and Honda needed to work on the whole package together. I'm just going to pause the video for a second to say that I hope you guys are enjoying the video and the content on my channel in general. If you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel and liking the video, it really does help the algorithm push my videos a bit more and for more people in the Formula 1 space to enjoy them. I'd also recommend you to go and check out this video in the top right corner after you finish this one, because it's quite an interesting one that you might be interested in. So let's get right back into the video. It can't just be two entities creating their own things, so Aston Martin doing the chassis and suspension, gearbox, and Honda doing the engine. They need to all come together, and they need to be integrated together across the whole kind of project and design phase. So it's unacceptable really for them to only know kind of the trouble they were in towards the end of last year. This should have been something they knew about for maybe even years in advance. And You could even question that they could have got out of the deal if they knew how bad things were. I did see some speculation that Honda might have tried to kind of underplay their struggles and make it look like the situation was better than it is. And I think that is a plausible theory, because essentially they knew they would lose out on a customer if they realised how big trouble they were in a few years ago. Aston Martin needed to keep a closer eye on them to make sure that they weren't lying and that the project really was where they thought it was. They literally had an engine expert in Andy Cowell running the team. But there is a saving grace for this project, because there is a big upgrade coming to the chassis at Hungary. This is apparently going to be a B-spec car, which they say just the chassis itself is going to bring 2.5 seconds, which would to put it ahead of Cadillac finally. And then apparently Honda are bringing a engine upgrade using the ADUO system around the Netherlands, I think so, after the summer break. So this essentially is probably the most crucial upgrade package that the Aston Martin outfit has ever put together, because it is going to define not only the rest of this season, but next season. It's also going to define whether Alonso decides to stick around or whether he decides to leave. And if you only have Lance Stroll driving for you at that point, you don't really have a proper benchmark for the car, because I can't see any other kind of serious driver wanting to come and drive for them at the moment. Max Verstappen's looking to leave Red Bull, but I think he'd go to McLaren before he went to Aston Martin right now. It'll also be important for Honda, because if they cannot bring an engine upgrade this year that makes any noticeable difference, it's likely that they're going to be behind for the rest of this regulation set and won't be able to catch up until they change to V8s in 2030, I think it was. So while there isn't being said in public about this update, I think behind the scenes there's a lot of pressure on the team to deliver, and if they don't, then the whole Aston Martin project could fail and Lawrence Stroll might end up selling up. I also think the Aston Martin project over the last few years has just shown a lot of mismanagement of people. For example, Andy Cowell, who was responsible for the Mercedes engines while they were dominant, was basically forced out of his position last year towards the end of the year after a not so good 2025. Before that, Dan Fallows was fired towards the end of 2023 or 2024. I cannot remember the specific time he was fired, but it'll be on the screen. Has gone back to Racing Bulls now. And these are very talented engineers that are being forced out of the team here. And that is just a lot of knowledge that is going to other teams. It makes you feel like there's a bit of a scapegoat culture going on at Aston Martin, where if you don't deliver soon enough, then you just get booted. Obviously, Otmar Safnauer left at the end of 2021, and that was another person who was just trying to work for the good of the project, but ended up getting forced out of the team. And obviously, same with the names I just mentioned, along with Eric Landlin, who was at Mercedes, went to Aston, and now has left again. And a whole car is never down to just one or two people. You can't blame one or two people for the failure of a project. It's down to everyone. If we go by the logic that they've shown so far, then Adrian Newey needs to be fired immediately for this disaster. So it just makes me wonder if the culture at Aston Martin isn't what you need to succeed as a Formula 1 team. That's my thoughts on why the AMR26 so far is the worst car that has been produced. I'd like you guys to go onto my channel and look at my 2027 driver predictions, because that's going to go a bit more into what I think of Aston Martin and what their driver lineup next year could be because of the situation. So go and check that out. It's in the top right corner now.